Okay, so continuing on talking about synthesis, and don't be troubled by the fact that I'm in a different outfit. That just means I recorded part 3 on a different day, doesn't it? So synthesis also means connecting the dots for your readers and making sure that the connections between ideas are clear. So it's all about, again, getting that bird's eye view of the body of evidence, not just looking one by one at each individual study, but looking from our perch atop a skyscraper at the city below and sort of describing the whole big picture of this body of evidence. What do we know about this topic? So this slide and the next 3 are actually not mine. They're from Walden University Writing Center. They have a terrific presentation on literature reviews. You can go to their website and view the whole thing. It's great. They use the term citation salad to describe a common error in, really, I see this in all kinds of academic writing and a lot in literature reviews. The citation salad happens essentially when you present a lot of what might be great information, statistics, quotes, information from your sources, but you're not really connecting the dots between those pieces of information. You're just telling us this bit of info and this bit of info and this bit of info without really telling us what it all means. So let's read this and then we'll see how we might fix this citation salad. Author X argued that the cost of public transportation in the Midwest affected student participation in after-school activities. Author Y reported that 60% of high school students in the United States relied on school buses to get home. According to author Z, in a study of after-school program attendance, most of the participants received rides home from parents or friends. So again, it's a lot of, good information. We can all see that there's sort of a theme in that it's all about after-school activities and transportation, but there's nothing in there to connect the dots. There's no topic sentence. We don't know what the overall main point of this paragraph is, and we don't really know how each of these pieces of information relates back to that. So how would we fix it? Let me scoot my face out of the way there. Multiple studies indicated a strong link between transportation availability and student engagement in extracurricular activities. So now we have a topic sentence. Much better, right? We have a strong link between transportation availability and whether kids can participate in extracurricular activities. Author X argued that the cost of public transportation in the Midwest affected student participation in after-school activities, which was similar to findings in studies across the country. Author Y reported that 60% of high school students in the United States relied on school buses to get home, meaning that if the majority of students had no alternative means of getting home if they decided to stay after regular school hours. According to author Z, in a study of after-school program attendance, most of the participants received rides home from the parents or friends. In addition to transportation availability, researchers have noted a strong correlation between student participation in extracurricular activities and parental involvement. I'm sorry, I stumbled over my words a little there. But you can see that the underlined words and phrases are the additions that we have added to help out that citation salad situation. So first we've got a topic sentence, which gives us our kind of umbrella. This is what everything is going to relate back to, the umbrella covering all the information in this paragraph. That is essential. Every paragraph, or every main idea anyway, needs a topic sentence. And then we also have some kind of transition phrases, like in the second sentence we've got which was similar to findings in studies across the country, and now we know we're going to get some more supporting information for our topic sentence. We've got then the third sentence there, we've got a little explanation of what we've just heard. So we've got 60% of high school students in the U.S. relying on school buses to get home, and now we've got some commentary on that. That means that if the students had no alternative means of getting home, if they decided to stay after regular school hours, if you don't have transportation, you can't participate. And then at the end, we have a transition sentence that is presumably going to lead us into the next paragraph and kind of refers back to what we've just talked about. In addition to transportation availability, which is what we've learned about in this paragraph, researchers have noted a strong correlation between student participation in extracurricular activities and parental involvement. And I like that because it does exactly what a transition sentence should do. A good transition sentence should look backward and then forward. So at the beginning of that sentence, we're referring back to what we've just learned about, transportation availability. And in the end of that sentence, we're looking forward to the next paragraph, which will be about the relationship between student participation in extracurricular activities and the involvement of their parents. So this is a real nice example of how you would fix that citation salad. So another common error, common problem that we see is what they're calling plop quotations. I've always referred to them as airdropped quotes or dropped quotes, but whatever you want to call it, they're not a great idea. And a plop quote is pretty much what it sounds like. It's just dropped in the middle of a paragraph. It doesn't have any introduction. There's nothing leading up to it. There's no commentary on it, no response to it, no work done at all to connect it to the rest of the paragraph. And it's a problem. So let's look at this example. Many educators and community members alike have expressed frustration about the lack of financial support for arts education. Quote, the arts and its related businesses are responsible for billions of dollars in cultural exports for this country. The ABC reported that orchestra and band programs in the Pacific Northwest saw their budgets cut by over 50% in the past 5 years, despite documented benefits to students and the community. So again, it's a good quote, but there's nothing really said about it. It's just kind of there. That's a plop quote. And it is a problem because A, we don't get full integration of that source material. We don't get the deeper discussion of how it relates to what we're talking about. And also because it just feels choppy to have a quote just plunked down in the middle of a paragraph. So how would we fix it? Many educators and community members alike have expressed frustration about the lack of financial support for arts education. In a prepared statement at a congressional hearing on arts funding, Seeger stated that the arts and its related businesses are responsible for billions of dollars in cultural exports for this country. So it would be in the government's best interest to strengthen arts education rather than allowing the funding to continue to diminish. So we've got an introduction, and this is rather an elaborate one. You can do something as simple as according to the CDC and leave it at that, however you want to handle it. And then after, we have got a little commentary, a little response to what we have just learned. And that typo is not mine. I had to, when you're using somebody else's slide, you have to use it as is. So that typo belongs to Walden University Writing Center, but that's fine. It's a great resource. That's a terrific website, and I highly recommend you use it. Easy to let a typo slip in every now and again, even among the best of us. So, some more tips for your findings section. And this example I owe to my wonderful colleague, Dr. Susan Fraser. It's not my example. She's a rock star in the field of nursing research. So it's important to note the difference between statistical and clinical significance. That can be very important. So an example of that from her, although statistically significant, a mean increase in heart rate of 4 beats per minute is not clinically important. And when you have a situation like that, it's important to note that. Some tips for your discussion section. In your discussion section, we analyze the evidence. So to analyze means to think and to write about the implications of what we've just learned. So in our findings section, we've learned what the available evidence says on our topic. We've gotten a lot of facts, and we've seen, what we know so far about our topic, but now we have to think about, all right, well, what does all this mean? What does it mean for practice? What does it mean for future research? Sometimes even, what might it mean for policy making or lawmaking or administration or whatever? So all of that's important. Implications, that so what question that we talk about, that's so important in academic writing. Assessing the quality of the evidence is also part of a lit review. And you can do this in your discussion section, or you can include a separate limitations section. And this has to do with the limitations of the studies that you've reviewed. Now, this shouldn't be that difficult. People get intimidated by it, but really every research study that is published will address its own limitations. The authors will tell you what the limitations of their research were, if it's a good study anyway. If they don't do that, then that could be a problem, meaning that the study wasn't a very good one. So you can just, again, if you've got an evidence table, you can just go right down that column where it says limitations, and you can see what all the limitations were. And you might want to address the limitations of the full body of evidence. So if there are common flaws in the methodology or the sampling or the design or whatever, you can say, most of these studies had really small sample sizes, or you could say most of these studies, whatever. I don't know what it could be because I'm not a nurse and I'm not a researcher, but there might be common limitations. Or you might want to take it individually and point out limitations of specific studies. And the reason why this is important is because you don't want readers to give too much weight to studies that aren't particularly strong, because people will make decisions based on literature reviews. They will make practice changes. They will make policy changes. They will actually do research. So we have to be honest about how strong the evidence is. And again, I made this presentation for a class, so ignore references to readings and whatnot. Formal criteria do exist to grade evidence. The Cochrane Library has some of those criteria, hierarchies of evidence, etc. But really, if you just look at the study itself, it should tell you what its limitations are. So we will ignore the references to the reading. But for example, some criteria that you can use to assess the evidence are sampling. Is it a random sample or a convenience sample? We're generally going to give heavier weight to random samples rather than convenience samples. You can look at the measurement. Was it highly or loosely structured? Does the study use multiple measures for key variables or just one? How reliable, consistent, and valid are the measures used? So those are all really good questions to ask. Some more criteria that you might use to assess evidence. You can look at design. Was the design chosen by the researchers consistent with the problem they were investigating? Did they correctly interpret and present their findings, or was it confusing, or did it not seem to match what you see in the tables and whatnot that they provide? Do the researchers critique their own methods? What do they say, as I said a moment ago? And etc., etc. There's a lot of information about this online, and you can certainly learn more about that, but those are just a few examples. So moving on to your conclusion section, this should be brief. A few paragraphs is ample, usually even just a couple of paragraphs. And a conclusion should do two things. It should first concisely recap the review's main points. You don't need to go into great detail because you want to avoid redundancy, unnecessary repetition. So you're just hitting the high points here. You're just kind of glancing back and what are the main things we've learned. And then you want to look to the future. So a conclusion should look backward and then look forward. What should the next steps be? What do we do with this information now that we have it, moving on into the future? And one way to learn to write a good conclusion is to just read some good conclusions. So, if you are writing a literature review for the first time, it's a great idea to read some published ones and just look at how the authors handled every section. It's not just true of the conclusion, but for all the sections. Look what goes in the findings section. Look what goes in the discussion. Look what kinds of things get brought up when they're assessing the evidence. And look at how they write their introduction and conclusion, and it'll give you a really good idea of what this kind of manuscript should look like. So some general tips. It's good to use direct quotations sparingly. We don't want a lot of direct quotes. Rely mostly on paraphrasing. And remember, you have to cite when you're paraphrasing as well. Okay, even if you're just using the ideas of another person and not the direct words, you have to cite regardless. If it did not originate in your noodle, then you need a citation. And this is the citation decision tree. It's real simple, really. Did you think of it? And if the answer is yes, you're good. You don't have to cite. If it's your own original idea, you're fine. And if the answer is no, then the next question is it common knowledge? Now, if the answer is yes, then you don't have to cite. And if the answer is no, it's not common knowledge, then you cite it. Now, the obvious question here is, well, what qualifies as common knowledge? And I believe that it is best to err on the side of caution with this, especially in graduate level writing, because when we get into our doctoral studies and beyond, we are very specialized. And what might be common knowledge in our specialty would not be common knowledge even to other nurses or doctors or whatever outside our specialty. So I think it's best to use your judgment on this. There are some things that obviously everybody who did not grow up in a cave with no human contact are going to know, but honestly, I would leave it to stuff like that. It has to be real obvious for you to not have to cite, in my opinion. I think you should be careful. So you should use language that accurately conveys your degree of certainty about the evidence as well. So, for example, if you're very certain or absolutely certain of something, you can say the evidence from all major studies overwhelmingly supports blank, but you want to avoid the word prove because it connotes absolute certainty, and we very rarely have absolute certainty in science. So avoid prove, proved, proven. If you're close to certain, you could say few who have reviewed the literature about this would disagree with, etc. And again, these examples in the quotes are from my colleague, Dr. Susan Fraser, who is awesome and a rock star, as I said. So we'll stop for here and we'll pick up with part 4.